I'm 75 years old, and last Tuesday, my grandson asked me a question I couldn't answer. Four simple words, and I have been sitting with them ever since. I want to tell you something before I go any further. I am not a man who gets emotional easily. I grew up in a time when men didn't talk about their feelings. You worked, you provided, you kept moving. That was the code. And I followed that code for most of my life without ever questioning it. But last Tuesday evening, something cracked open in me. And I have spent the last several days trying to figure out how to talk about it. I am still not entirely sure I know how, but I am going to try, because I think some of you need to hear this, especially those of you who are somewhere in the middle of your lives, still thinking you have all the time in the world. My grandson is 9 years old. His name is Daniel. He has these big brown eyes that look at you like he's trying to figure out a puzzle. Honest eyes. The kind of eyes that children have before the world teaches them to look away. We were sitting out on the porch after dinner. It was one of those quiet evenings in early spring where the air is still cool, but you can feel the warmth starting to come back. I had a cup of coffee. He had a glass of juice. We were just sitting there, not really talking, watching the yard. And then, out of nowhere, he looked up at me and asked me that question. I laughed. The way you laugh when something surprises you and you don't know what else to do. I gave him the answer I had been giving people my whole life without even thinking about it. Of course I am, buddy. Of course. But he did not smile and move on the way I expected him to. He just kept looking at me, steady, calm, and then he said real quietly, "You don't look happy, Grandpa." I did not know what to say. So I said nothing. I changed the subject. I asked him about school. He let me, but something had already shifted. Something I cannot fully explain. That night I lay in bed and I could not sleep. I kept hearing those four words in his voice. "Are you happy, Grandpa?" And then the follow-up, "You don't look happy." I stared at the ceiling for a long time, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, I realized something that genuinely shook me. In 75 years of living, I had never once stopped to seriously ask myself that question. Not once, not in any real, honest way. I had asked myself if I was doing enough, if I was providing enough, if I was keeping up with everything I was supposed to keep up with. But happy, whether I was actually truly happy, that question had somehow never made it to the list. And I want to tell you how I got here. How a man lives 75 years without ever asking himself the most important question there is. Because I do not think I am the only one. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knew your name and your father's name, and probably your grandfather's name too. We were not rich, but we were not struggling either. My dad worked at a factory. My mother stayed home, raised 4 kids, kept the house running like clockwork. That was just how it was back then. Nobody questioned it. My father was a good man. I want to be clear about that. He worked hard every single day of his life. He never missed a bill payment, never missed a day of work that I can remember. He put food on the table and a roof over our heads, and he did it without complaint. But he was not a man who talked much. Not about feelings, not about life, not about what was going on inside him. You just did not do that. You handled things quietly, and you kept moving. That was his way, and it became my way too, because when you grow up watching someone, you absorb more than you realize. I met Carol when I was 24. She was in her last year of college. I had already been working for a couple of years at an engineering firm, trying to build something steady for myself. She was warm and funny, and she had this way of laughing that made whatever room she was in feel lighter. I fell for her fast. We got married 2 years later in a small church outside Columbus. Her mother cried the whole ceremony. My dad shook my hand afterward and told me I had done good. That was about as emotional as it got on our side. We had our son, Michael, in 1976. Our daughter, Patrice, came along 3 years after that. And just like that, life became about forward motion, mortgage payments, school supplies, Little League on Saturday mornings, trying to make sure there was enough money left at the end of the month. Carol handled most of the home. I handled most of the income. That was our arrangement, and for a long time, it felt like enough. I was proud of what I was building. Genuinely proud. I thought that was what love looked like. Showing up, providing, making sure the people you cared about had what they needed. Nobody in my world talked about emotional presence or being connected. You just worked and you hoped that the work said everything that needed saying. The 1980s went by in a blur. The kids grew. Carol and I settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage. We did not fight much. We did not talk deeply much either, if I'm being honest. We watched television in the evenings. We went to church on Sundays. We took one vacation a year if we could manage it. And I want to be careful here, because I do not want you to think that life was unhappy. It did not feel unhappy. It felt normal. It felt like what life was supposed to be. I was doing everything I was supposed to do. But here is what I did not understand back then. Normal and happy are not always the same thing. And I would not figure that out for a very long time. The question was so simple. That is what still gets me when I think about it. 4 words from a 9-year-old boy. And somehow, those 4 words did what 75 years of living had not managed to do. They made me stop. Are you happy, Grandpa? We were sitting on that porch, like I told you. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day. Daniel had come over with my daughter Patrice for dinner, the way they do most weeks. Carol used to cook on those nights. Now I order from the Italian place down the road, and we eat at the kitchen table, and it is fine. It is a good evening. After dinner, Daniel and I went out to the porch the way we sometimes do. He likes it out there. He likes watching the birds at the feeder Carol put up years ago that I still keep filled. I was drinking my coffee and feeling about as settled and comfortable as I ever feel these days. And then he asked me. Like I said, I laughed it off, gave him the easy answer. Of course I am, buddy. But Daniel is not a child who lets things go easily. He sat there for a moment, just looking at me with those eyes, and then he said it again, softer this time. You don't look happy, Grandpa. Now I want you to understand something. I was not in any kind of crisis that evening. Nothing bad had happened. I was not grieving or struggling or going through anything in particular. I was just a 75-year-old man sitting on his porch drinking coffee. And somehow that made it worse, because if there was no reason to be unhappy, then what was Daniel seeing? I changed the subject, asked him about his baseball team. He went along with it, but something had already gotten under my skin, and I could feel it, even as we talked about his pitching coach and whether they had a chance at the playoffs. That night I could not sleep. I lay there in the dark, in a bed that has felt too big for 6 years now, and I kept turning that question over. Are you happy? Are you happy? and the more I turned it over, the more uncomfortable I became. Because every time I tried to answer it honestly, really honestly, I came up empty. Not miserable, not broken, just empty. Like I had been going through the motions for so long that I had forgotten there was supposed to be something underneath the motions. I started going back through my life in my mind. The years at the firm, the weekends that blurred together, the evenings in front of the television, the vacations where I was physically there but mentally still solving some problem from work. Carol trying to talk to me about something meaningful and me giving her half my attention because I was tired. It was not one big terrible moment. It was 1,000 small absences. 1,000 times I was there, but not really there. And I had never once looked at it clearly until a 9-year-old boy with honest eyes asked me 4 words on a spring evening. That was the turning point. Not a tragedy, just the truth. After that night, something changed in the way I moved through my days. I started noticing things. Not dramatic things, just quiet truths that had been sitting in plain sight for years, waiting for me to finally look at them. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence that comes at the end of a good day, the other kind. The kind that fills a house when 2 people have stopped truly talking to each other without ever deciding to. Carol and I had that silence for a long time, years, if I am honest. We were kind to each other. We were functional. But somewhere along the way, we had stopped going beneath the surface, and neither of us had ever said anything about it. I think we both just got used to it, and then she was gone, and I never got the chance to go back. Carol passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, the way that one does. We had about 4 months from diagnosis to the end. And in those 4 months, I sat beside her more than I had sat beside her in the previous decade combined. I held her hand. I told her I loved her. But I never told her what I should have told her 20 years earlier. I never said, "You are the best thing that happened to me, and I am sorry I was not more present for you." I assumed she knew. That is what I told myself. She knew. I am not sure she did. And that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Then there is Michael, my son. He lives out in Colorado now, has a good career, a family of his own. We talk on the phone maybe twice a month. The conversations are friendly but short. Sports, weather, how the grandkids are doing. We never figured out how to go deeper than that. And I think that is mostly my fault. I was not a father who invited that kind of conversation. I provided. I showed up to the important things, but I did not sit with him the way a boy needs his father to sit with him. And now we are 2 polite strangers who share a last name and a history we never really talked through. Patrice is different. She is warmer, more persistent. She is the one who kept reaching toward me even when I did not reach back. But I realized, sitting with all of this, that our closeness is built almost entirely on her effort. She built that bridge. And then there is the memory I think about most, the one that still catches in my chest when it surfaces. Patrice was 11 years old, and she had the lead in her school play. She had practiced for weeks. She talked about it at dinner every night. I had a work trip that week, a conference in Detroit. I told myself it was important. I went. I missed the play. The conference was not important. Nothing that happened there mattered. I cannot even tell you what it was about. She never mentioned it afterward. That silence was worse than anything she could have said. There is a certain kind of quiet that comes with being 75. Not everybody gets there, and I do not take it for granted. The noise of the middle years, the deadlines and the obligations and the constant forward push, that all settles down eventually. And what you are left with is time, real time, the kind where you can finally sit with yourself without an excuse to get up and walk away. I did not know how to do that for most of my life. Sitting with myself, I mean. It felt uncomfortable in a way I could not name. So I filled the space. Work, television, projects around the house, anything that kept the quiet at bay. I think a lot of men of my generation did the same thing without realizing it. We were not taught to look inward. We were taught to look forward. Keep moving. Do not dwell. And so we did not dwell. We just kept moving until one day there was nowhere left to move to. After Daniel asked me that question, I started doing something I had never really done before. I started being still, just sitting, not watching anything, not doing anything, just sitting and letting whatever came up come up. It was uncomfortable at first, genuinely uncomfortable. All these old memories and feelings that had been pushed down for decades started rising to the surface. And instead of finding something to do, I just let them come. What I found, underneath all of it, was not what I expected. I expected regret, and there was some of that. But mostly what I found was a kind of grief for the version of myself that never got to show up fully. The husband who could have said more. The father who could have stayed more. The man who could have asked his own father, before it was too late, what was going on inside him. That conversation never happened. My father died when I was 52. We never once talked about anything real. And I realized I had been carrying that without knowing it my entire adult life. I also realized something about happiness that I wish I had understood at 40. Happiness is not a reward that arrives after you finish everything on your list. I spent decades believing, somewhere underneath the surface, that I would feel it later, when the mortgage was paid, when the kids were grown, when I retired, when things settled down, but later kept moving. It was always just ahead of me, and I never stopped to ask why. What truly matters, I know now, is embarrassingly simple. It is presence. It is telling people what they mean to you while they are still there to hear it. It is asking the people you love how they are really doing and then actually listening to the answer. It is not assuming that providing and showing up is the same as being connected. My father could not teach me that because nobody taught him, and I could not teach my children because I had not learned it yet. But that cycle does not have to keep going. That is the one thing I feel certain about. It is not too late to change what you pass on. So I want to talk to you now, directly, the way I wish somebody had talked to me a long time ago. If you are somewhere in your 40s or 50s, or even your 60s, I need you to hear this. You still have time. Not unlimited time, nobody has that, but real time, meaningful time. Time to change the way you show up for the people you love. Time to have the conversations you have been putting off. Time to ask yourself the question my grandson asked me, and actually sit with the answer instead of laughing it off and changing the subject. Because that is what I did my whole life. I changed the subject. Every time something inside me tried to ask whether I was truly living or just moving through the days, I found something else to focus on. A bill to pay, a project to finish, a problem at work. It is remarkably easy to stay busy, especially for people like us, people who are raised to believe that busyness was the same thing as purpose. It is not. I can tell you that clearly now. Busyness is just noise. Purpose is something quieter and harder to find, and you will not find it by moving faster. I think about Carol almost every day, not with the sharp grief of the early years, but with a softer kind of missing that has settled into my bones. And when I think about her now, what I feel most is not gratitude for the life we built, though I do feel that. What I feel most is a wish, just one. I wish I had told her more, not shown her, told her. I wish I had looked at her across the kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday morning and said, "I see you. I know what you carry. You are the reason any of this worked. Thank you." I never said that. I assumed she knew. Please do not assume the people you love know. Tell them, say the words, do it today, not because something is wrong, but because something is right, and it deserves to be spoken out loud. Call the person you have been meaning to call. Have the conversation you have been putting off because it feels too heavy or too awkward, or because you are not sure how to start. Start badly if you have to. It does not matter how you start. It matters that you start. And ask yourself the question. Sit down somewhere quiet, put everything else aside for 10 minutes, and ask yourself honestly, am I happy? Not am I managing, not am I keeping up. Am I actually happy with the way I am living and the way I am loving the people around me? If the answer comes easily, that is wonderful. Hold on to it. If the answer does not come, or if what comes makes you uncomfortable, do not look away from it. That discomfort is not a problem. That discomfort is a direction. My grandson gave me the rest of my life with 4 words on a spring evening. He did not mean to. He was just being honest the way children are before the world teaches them otherwise. Do not wait for a child to wake you up. Ask yourself, right now, are you happy?